Welcome to my humble little office. My name is R. Keith Andrews. I am a spiritual guide and paranormal adept. The journey continues today on October 24th, 2021 at approximately 8:39 p.m. PST. I mentioned yesterday we were going to look at very much the impact and the methodology behind that thing called your word. Now, the reality behind it is this. Everybody owns a lot of things. Okay, everybody's got material stuff all over the place. But the one thing that cannot be taken from you is your word. When you give your word on whatever, that is ultimately the only thing you actually truly possess. Okay, it's the only thing that cannot be taken from you. Okay, your spiritual beliefs can be beaten out of you, as it were. Okay, your life can be taken. Your material stuff can obviously be taken. Okay, but your word cannot be. Now, granted, when we take a look at spiritual beliefs, yes, they can be beaten out of you. And what I mean by that is if you get told often enough the way something is, ultimately what ends up happening is it's not a question of whether you choose to give it away, but what's happening is you're being repeatedly told. Now, if your spiritual belief is one way, it falls under the same category. If you've got a child and you constantly tell that child or that friend that they are stupid, that they are idiots, okay, they are going to take that on in time. It's called programming. Okay, it's called mental programming. Now, it's done all along. Okay, but let's look at the reality behind your word. You can be coerced via either, subtle means or very direct means to give your word on something you don't believe in. You absolutely can. But it cannot be taken. Somebody cannot take your word from you and apply it to something else. They can certainly take your words out of context and put them someplace. Okay, and use them for a different purpose. But the reality behind it is this. Okay, when you give your word, and I've mentioned a number of times that every tool I use, or that I offer, is a tool I personally work with. Okay, if it applies to me. Now, this does not mean I'm perfect by any functional stretch. I've made my mistakes. But I thought I got to, and I know there's a lot of people out there that get this. Somebody, and I have no idea who, because I really didn't pay much attention to who the person was. I debated whether or not to respond to it, and I'm still debating that in all fairness. But basically, what I got told was that quite literally, what I got told was that I'm full of BS, which is great. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. The only question I have and I don't have an answer to it, and it really doesn't matter too much to me, because it's not so much how somebody sees you. When you give your word on something, okay, it's not necessarily going to fit everybody's belief structure. Everybody's not going to take it. I was asked where it came to the UFO stuff, why people would believe what I say. Okay, why they should believe. And as I've told people multiple times over the years, I'm not asking you to believe me. Okay, it's not a question of what you believe, it's a question of whether I do. I'm still holding down a stable job. I'm still being a productive member of society. Okay, so what goes on up here, as long as I'm treating people the way I desire to be treated, and as long as you treat people the way you desire to be treated, in other words, if you desire people to be honest with you, be honest with them. Okay. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. And I heard it put one day by a gentleman. He come to me and he goes, whatever you do, never explain yourself. And I looked at him a little confused because I'm used to trying to explain things, right? Even my own decisions on a lot of cases. But this gentleman looked at me and he goes, "You don't explain yourself because your friends don't require an explanation and your enemies don't deserve one." Now, I cannot prove most of what I tell people. This is why what I keep telling people, yourself included, is that if we desire, or more to the point, when we desire the world to change, it's going to take the effort of everybody. And this lifetime I came back with one message for people, and that is, working together, we can make this a better world for virtually everybody. Now, of course, if you are listening to somebody, if you're watching a video, okay, and people in every video that's out there, okay, when you're talking about videos, whether they're gaming videos, whether they're ideas on this is how to buy real estate or whatever, okay, especially when we're talking about belief structures, okay, the one thing I do encourage you, again, this boils down to your word, and your written word is the same import as the spoken word. But let us be clear about one thing where it comes to the written word, or when you record a spoken word. You can cut it up. You can take words out of context. You can take sentences out of context. I see it happen all the time. Okay. And, people talk about following their word, and I talk about it all the time. As I've mentioned, people, and I don't want to go down a real heavy-duty religious bend here, but to give you an idea of being taken out of context. Okay, and I really debated for a long time whether to go down this road. But to take a look at it, and I think it has to do with the Bible. Of course, understand, I grew up, I'll use that term loosely. I was baptized Roman Catholic, raised Protestant, which is where my terminology comes from. Right now, I'm in the middle of reading the Bible, quite seriously for the first time. But at this point, I just passed, I believe it was Deuteronomy 13, Deuteronomy 14, something like that. Okay, somewhere in there, where it does in the Bible tell you, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live amongst you." But that's not all it tells you. If you actually read that section, it will tell you, yes, that, but when said witch leads you away from that God. Okay, now, if people if people take things out of context, or without understanding what they're looking at, things are going to get screwy. Okay, now, I've talked to people about things that have gone on in military laboratories. And of course, the problem there is trying to get the information from the military. But there are enough people out there that go through this sort of thing that have to understand, or that it would be beneficial for them to understand, that others have gone through it as well. Now, this does not mean that everybody that is talking about going through military laboratories and that kind of problems, doesn't mean everybody went through it. Okay, and it certainly isn't going to help them in the way of making them feel better, except to know they're not necessarily alone in it. Okay, when the problem I run into is this: I'm not well read. Well, and I'm really not. I'm not well educated. I can give you a whole list of other things that I'm not. But the one thing I will stand my ground on, as much as some of my information may not be accurate in people's eyes, it is nonetheless what I see as the truth. That is my word backing it. Okay, and I've looked at other videos that people have posted, even with pictures that people have put on, photographs that they put on Facebook, on Twitter, what have you, where there's comments underneath them. Okay, I even see it with some of the superstars, like as in singers and what have you, where you'll find somebody making a derogatory or a disparaging comment, And the one question that I have to ask, or that I have to point out, is when people do that, especially when they do it with no backing, with no explanation, if it's just a derogatory comment, and keep this in mind, because again, we are talking about what comes out of your mouth or what comes out of your pen. When you're making a comment, make certain that you're providing enough information for people so they know what that comment is for, and not just to make yourself feel better by calling somebody else down. Because I will tell you this, when you give your word, when you're talking to people and you're saying, this is how I feel, first and foremost, okay, and I've mentioned this before, when it comes to these videos, this is what comes out on these videos is my opinion or my interpretation of what I've been seeing or what I've gone through. The reality is the same thing goes for you. When you're doing a video or when you're doing a post of your own, what comes out of your mouth is your opinion, your point of view. Therefore, although facts may be mistaken, they could be erroneous, your opinion cannot be wrong. Okay, the information leading to your viewpoint may be misguided. Okay, but your opinion cannot be wrong. Okay, so when it comes to your word, whenever you go to say anything, do your best to stay calm about it, because I will tell you, the fastest way to scramble logic is emotion. And the fastest way to stabilize emotion is logic. And I know that sounds really confusing, especially when you deal with somebody that is really wound up, really upset. And I will admit, when I saw that comment the other day, okay, actually I think it was today, but don't quote me on that. It might have been yesterday. I don't know. Okay, for me, time gets really screwy. Some people have said that it gets screwy because I don't pay attention to it. Well, that's not entirely the truth of it. Okay. It is partially true. I don't pay a lot of attention to time because of the fact that time for me doesn't register the same way it does for you. Hence why sometimes I end up going over on the times. But when we're talking about giving your word or using your word, okay, you have to look at it and go, first and foremost, when we couple that in with minimize the negative, maximize the positive. So, when you're telling somebody something, make certain, do your best to make certain anyway, that what you're telling them is you're giving them enough information so that they can take a look at it. Okay, so they can understand where you're coming from. Now, I've told people constantly, especially since March 6th of 2021, that I am aiming at getting my life sorted out, getting the energy in my life working properly. And I am seeking guidance. And there was somebody here the other day, another viewer that left a comment that said I've been repeating myself almost identically. Okay, and frankly, I missed it altogether. Okay, but when they pointed it out to me, did I take offense to it? Not at all. Okay. Did I do my best to correct that path? I'm still working on that part, and I just don't know whether it's working or not. But what I do know is that everything I talk about is the way that I personally see things, and it does refer to tools that I personally am implementing. Okay, the philosophies I live by. Hence why, if you look up here, that shelf is starting to be cleared. Okay, because I'm looking at the stuff in the video behind me here. Okay, it kind of looks like a steward is here, or a steward, way back there. Now, that being said, I'm taking a look at this, getting rid of the stuff and moving the stuff out of the way that I don't desire there. So that when I'm sitting here talking to you, or to myself sometimes, more often than not, in all fairness, I'm not looking at all this clutter anymore. Okay, it's going away. I ended up taking 4 boxes out of this room the other day. that either went to recycling or went to a secondhand store. Okay, as in they left my building. Okay, not to just be reorganized elsewhere. Whole pile of it went to recycling. Stuff I was going through paperwork, as it turned out, from 2006. Needless to say, okay, I mentioned I was a pack rat, and I have been for years. Still working on breaking that. But the reason I bring this to your attention is because when I tell you that these are the things I'm doing, I'm giving you my word. This is what I'm doing, and that helps me. A little selfish in some ways, but it helps me to stay focused on getting things done, especially when they're right there in front of me. Now, the comical part of it is the stuff that's right here. Okay, I can see all this regularly, easily. The stuff in my hallway in the cupboards that look similar to what these used to, I don't see them all the time because, yes, they're sitting there when I walk by, but they're not right in front of me. And when you're looking at giving your word on something, saying, I'm going to do this, if you have to write it down, absolutely do so. If you have a problem with memory and you've got somebody close by, okay, that's comfortably at hand, i.e., a parent, a friend, a sibling, doesn't matter. Ask them to remind you to do it. Being reminded does not mean you're not doing it. Okay, many kids, as they're growing up, and I mentioned before, every one of you is exactly the same in this respect. You're all children, as am I. Every one of you has a mother and a father. Okay, now this is assuming, of course, we are talking about the ones of you that have a dual gender reproductive system. Okay, any entity that has a dual gender reproductive system has a mother and a father. Okay. Yes, I know that sounds a little strange on occasion. Why throw that in here after the rest of it? Well, the reality behind it is, from my experience and from my understanding and my belief structure, the whole idea of creationism and evolution are interchangeable, much like magic and logic, magic and science are both not interchangeable, but they are cooperative. Okay. Logic and emotion are both necessary to bring things into balance. Okay. And when you're talking about giving your word, what happens is, as soon as you say something, you're drawing that energy out of the spiritual world into the material world, in this case, into the auditory world, which gives it that much more impact. Not only at that point, the moment you utter it, you're not the only one that's witness to it anymore. Okay. When you utter your word, okay, anybody within earshot is at a point where they can verify that it was said. Now, yes, sometimes that'll get confused, but the important factor is the moment you lay claim to that thought and you put it in vocal or in visual terms, you have now drawn it out of the spiritual plane into the material world, and now you can start working with it. Okay, and this is why, when I tell people this is the way I see it, don't take my word for it. Check your own facts. Okay, I mentioned a long time ago that scientists down in the States, from my recollection, scientists down in the States, about 20 years ago-ish, they did a scientific experiment where they discovered that plants, actual, like plants, are affected by the energy that is going on in the room in which they're living. Okay, and this was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. There was a farmer that years ago he had an orchard, and he had quite a number of trees, but there were two trees that he dealt with in particular. He left most of his trees alone, just watered them in fertilized and what have you as normal. But one tree, he talked every day to it. He, talked about how happy he was, how strong it was, how fertile it was, how hard it was working. He kept telling this one tree that. He took another tree and continually told it how lazy it was, how it was not carrying its share of the work, how this other tree that he was being really nice to, how that tree was outshining him and was making it was, he wasn't the negative tree was not pulling his weight. He was being lazy. Well, at the end of the season, most of the trees produced a normal yield. But this one specific tree produced, if I recall the numbers correctly, almost double the yield. And yet the one that he kept telling was lazy produced maybe half the yield. Now, is this empirical proof? Probably not. The scientists, they did prove it empirically. Okay. And when you take a look at that, when you're looking at that issue, okay, don't take my word for it. If you've got plants, whether they're house plants, garden plants, it doesn't matter. But give it a shot yourself and see what happens. Tell your plant, how happy you are with it, how nice it is, especially flowering plants. Okay, and see whether or not it has an impact for you. Don't take my word. Test it yourself. Okay. Now, will I tell you, in my opinion, this is absolutely the way it works? You bet. Now, with that in mind, if that's not the way you see it, that's up to you. Okay. I'm not here to prove it one way or the other, but I am here to tell you that since I started doing this, I've been really recording the journey. I've been paying a lot of attention to what's been coming out on Facebook and what have you. And I'm very happy to say in the last few months, people have been posting more about people helping people, animals helping animals, really positive, uplifting stuff. Okay, now, if that is a bad thing, let me know. If it's a good thing, keep it up. When I got accused of starting a cult of trying to tell people to be nice to each other, it really caught me off guard. I'm thinking, how could that possibly be bad? And essentially, the same question still applies when I got this message that I was full of it. If I'm full of it and I'm sitting here telling you, be nice to each other, I'm asking you to help each other out, to help the animals and the plants around you, and to share your good fortune with others without strangling yourself. If that's being full of it, it's an interesting term, but maybe, if that's the case, maybe there's something to it. Maybe everybody needs to be full of that sort of thing. And I mean, realistically, if everybody were standing up and saying, hey, let's be nice to each other. Let's stop picking fights. Let's stop insulting people. Let's stop embarrassing people or showing embarrassing pictures. I mean, there are so many times I look at the video at YouTube and at Facebook, and it's there's this caption. These are pictures that these people don't want seen. Well, think about that for half a moment before you post them yourself. If there were compromising pictures of you, would you want them to be seen? And if not, would you appreciate it if somebody else posted them? Okay. Same thing applies with the comments. Okay, if you're making a comment on somebody's video, okay, then ask yourself, is that a comment that you would like to see made about a video you posted or about a comment you made? If the answer is no, then you might want to think twice before posting. And thus far, people are doing a phenomenal job. Okay, still waiting to see the fallout, if you will, and I'm talking on a positive nature of this shift. I mean, I saw something the other day I heard something that was just absolutely bizarre. Now, I don't know what city it was, okay, And again, don't take my word for it. This is what I heard. I did not look into it. Okay, I did not go and double check. But it was just the thought of what somebody told me that caught me really off guard. And I'm sitting there, and what they did was they said there was a school, and I don't know what city. There was a school in Florida, in Florida in the U.S. It's a private school, apparently, that suspended every student that was double vaccinated. Okay. Now, the thing about this is, like I said, I have not checked it out myself, but absolutely go check it out. Okay. But the important part from my standpoint is this. Whether that's an accurate statement or not, the thought of that statement is problematic. Okay. And I can see where the complications can come in. I'm not saying it happened. I'm saying this is what I was told. Okay. But the thing I'm looking at there is there's been all this buildup of getting vaccinated and what have you, which is great. And if that's the way you want to go, that's great. But when a school flat out starts denying people education because they chose to do what they felt was best for their health, is this education that makes sense? Okay, it's very much in my eyes along the same idea as pushing kids through the schools, giving them high grades when they don't actually know how to do the work. Okay, now if you talk to me face to face and you ask me the same sort of questions, I'll give you the same sort of answers. Because the reality is, this is simply the way I see the world. These are the philosophies I personally live by. Okay. Now, could I apologize for upsetting people? Certainly. Problem is that the people I upset, I'm not going to be able to I'm not here to prove to anybody. Okay. And, I look at it this way. I am constantly telling people, or doing my best to tell people, be nice to each other. Help each other out. Okay. Now, if that's a bad thing, if people see that as a bad thing, I have to wonder, would it be better, or would more people follow me if I started telling people about that they should, fight each other, that war is a great thing, or that, there's any sorts of things that I could be saying that promote the negative side, but I choose not to. Because I've mentioned it before. War itself has never, ever, ever brought peace. In all of recorded history, war does not bring peace. It brings quiet. Okay. Communication, comprehension, understanding. Working together. That brings peace. Okay. And when you're giving your word, okay, following your word will cause you a whole lot less stress than telling somebody something and then going the other direction. Now, on that note, I'm going to bring this to a close. I will be back again tomorrow. But until then, take care of yourselves and each other. And for pity's sakes, stay positive.